Good evening and welcome to another edition of Mental Health Mondays, brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church and Grace House Cincinnati, a nonprofit agency and ministry of Saving Grace Community Church. Joining me once again is our resident expert, Dr. Quentin Moss, President and CEO of Modern Psychiatry. Good evening, my brother.
Good evening, sir. Glad to be here, man.
Well, I know it's been another rough week with your brackets. You said you didn't have one, but I'm sure you had some favorite teams. Any major disappointments for you?
You know, it would been nice to see maybe Gonzaga miss that shot at the end.
Right,
that would have been nice.
right. I think Mick Cronin did everything he possibly could do as a coach. I mean, he had a masterful game plan, but I couldn't believe. I really thought Mick and the crew were going to come back through.
Yeah. Good game tonight, though.
Oh yeah, and we'll be finishing time. Well, we are excited tonight again. Another interesting topic and a needed topic. Tonight's topic we're going to talk about tonight: women in medicine. And we know that mental illness and disease can affect anyone. And I'm not a physician, but you are. But I'm sure being a doctor, like any other profession that involves working directly with the public, can be a very stressful job. And let's just face it, sometimes working with other adults can be extremely stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But tonight we want to look at women in medicine, and we want to look at the strides that have been made and the mental, the spiritual, and physical challenges that go along with being a woman, particularly a woman of color in medicine. In an article that appeared last year by Lippy Roy, MD, titled "It's My Calling to Change the Statistics: Why We Need More Black Female Physicians," she shares that in 1864, there were only 54,000 doctors, and of them, only 300 were women, until Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler became the first Black female in the U.S. to receive a medical degree from the New England Female Medical College. And she went on to share that 156 years later, 50% of medical school enrollees in the U.S. are women. And she pointed out that though Black Americans make up 13% of the U.S. population, they make up only 4% of the 877,000 active doctors now. And of that entire workforce, only 2% are Black female doctors. What a staggering number that is. So tonight we are excited to have a local physician joining us, Dr. Nita Walker. Hey, Dr. Walker.
How are you this evening?
Wonderful. Dr. Walker is Senior Vice President for Ambulatory Services for UC Medical, and also an internal medicine doctor, and was Chief of Residence during her tenure as she trained at UC Medical Center. And one of the persons that had an opportunity to meet Dr. Walker when she was doing her thing is our resident expert, Dr. Moss. Mm-hmm. Dr. Moss, how was it working with Dr. Walker?
You know, I just felt like I had to step up my game. You know, I mean, she has a great reputation, and I was a resident, do family medicine, then do psych, and I've had a chance to kind of rotate underneath her briefly, and then to see the work that she's done at UC. I really felt like she really represented, and I felt like I had to step up my game just to be in the same room with her. I mean, she is the William Osler of our time when it comes to UC medicine. So I really appreciate what
Wow.
she does and what she's done for the community.
And thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. And it's always wonderful to see people that you train and see them do so well and do so much for the community, because Dr. Moss does a lot for the community. So greatly appreciate all that you do.
Well, tell me, how is that as African-American physicians? Because we as a people, we're always very proud to learn of someone receiving a medical license within our families. It's just it's just one of those things like, yes, yes, yes. So how was it, Dr. Moss, particularly in such a male-dominated field, to have and to work with Dr. Walker and see just how inspiring was that to you?
It was very inspiring, in the program that I was in, there weren't, many minorities, and there were a few women who were in the family medicine side, some on the psych, not a great deal on the combined setting. So to see her to soar, and, it's one thing to be a leader, in which she naturally is, but to be astute, to be a sharp clinician, and that's the thing. So when you see someone who knows a lot, a broad fund of knowledge, and when you're rotating on that rotation, you want to emulate that, and not only that, but, as an African American coming in, I wanted to represent her well, right? So I'm on her rotation, there's the added sense of, responsibility that I really want her to shine well by me trying to do well, while I'm in my training. Wow. So I think that's another dimension that comes with being African American and going through training, is that you really want to make sure that the people who are above you, who are also African American, that they look good, and they look good by you doing well. So
wow. That's good. Dr. Walker, in preparation of tonight's show, I checked out the fact that you were a recipient in 2019 kind of Woman of the Year award at YWCA. And one of the things that you shared was just how important it was for you to pour in to young doctors, and how important is it? It was important, obviously, Dr. Moss, to do well, to represent not only you, but the demographic that you represent. How important was it for you to just be available and to pour everything about being a physician into a person like Dr. Moss?
First of all, I love teaching, and I love the opportunity and the privilege of being able to actually help develop the next generation that comes after us. As you've said, there are not a lot of African Americans in medicine, and it's something we've really got to work on. But it's important because, number one, not just do I want them to represent for me, I want to represent for them. Most importantly, I want to be there to support them. The journey is challenging. The journey is long in terms of medicine. The structure of it is such that it's a long, difficult journey, but it's important to provide support for those students, and it's important to make sure they know that they have someone there. So many of our students tell me that they face microaggressions regularly, particularly African American students. I'm in a couple of groups where I do some mentoring with students around that, and it really is still very ever present, and it's constant. And so one of the most important things I always want students to know is that I'm here for them. And they can call me anytime, they can text anytime, because we can walk through how you want to respond to that, how you want to handle those things, because there's a lot out there, and we always need to be there for each other and make sure we can get it done.
One of the things, I guess it's a misnomer, sometimes we treat doctors as though they're not human, that they don't deal with and struggle with, that they somehow are able to separate themselves from delivering bad test results, or they're able to just really not be empathetic, to being able to having shared a chronic or diagnosis or something. And so really what I hear you guys saying is it's obvious that you all are human too.
Absolutely.
And so in terms of helping those young docs deal with microaggression, how much of a challenge is that on their psyche, particularly females, is whether the confidence, because see, listen, if they're coming from the African American community, once again, they've been lauded and applauded. You're a success story. Then they make their way, they get accepted into medical school, and they start progressing, and then wham, but I'm talented, I'm educated. So what kind of counseling, how do you help them through that?
It's funny you said that, because last Thursday night I was with a group of students to talk specifically about that. We talked about implicit bias and how to navigate it. And many of the students did share that those microaggressions are like little cuts on their soul day after day, and that they really struggle with some of that. And I think even more so than in the past, because we sadly expected these sorts of things and we girded ourselves for them, but they didn't expect it. So many of them tell me that one of the things that really is something they struggle with is that they didn't expect to still be confronted with so much of this. And it comes from patients, it comes from other physicians, it comes from a whole mix of people who really, number one, like you said, underestimate their ability, because that's still a common problem. Some of them feel like they're imposters because they come from situations where they're not sure if they really have what it takes. And people look at them and say, they're just here because they're Black and they were let in as an affirmative action candidate. Many of them feel sort of like they're imposters, and they suffer related to that. So they shared a lot of concerns in terms of what they feel and how the emotional toll it takes on them. So the good news is that, fortunately, unlike when we were back in the day, Quentin, and we didn't have as many structures and things in place. So the good news is that we have begun to put more together to support our students, particularly our African-American students, including mentoring sessions like we do, including the fact that particularly COVID has illuminated the need. We saw incredible burnout, incredible stress, particularly at some of the hospitals where we had, there were times at UCMC we had more than 100 patients with COVID in the hospital. We had very full ICUs. So we saw incredible stress on our students. We saw incredible stress on our teams and lots of burnout. So we have tried to put a lot of mechanisms in place. But most importantly, what we tried to do, like you said, recognize that we are not superhuman. Recognize that we need support too. We need to ask for mental health services. We need to be able to take pauses when we need them. We are not superhuman. We're like anybody else. We are not perfect, and we need that support as well.
I think that's critical, what you just said, that you're not perfect, but you're held at a higher standard if you make a mistake.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's almost as if those accidents, it's just people don't care, Well, who cares, And to have that weight, to perform, has to be wow. So when you entered into medical school, how many people were in your demographic? How many females, that you see around you? I mean, how was that?
When I went to medical school, women were probably about 35% of classes, and actually in my class we only had 10 Black students. Actually, only 7 of us graduated. And there were 4 women who graduated and 3 men. And that was in Georgia. I am proud to say, thank goodness, that the school now has about 30 or 40 students per class who are African American, and women constitute about 50% of the class. And so things have gotten better. And it was a tough time, and there were a lot of things said, a lot of things done. And people had low expectations. Unfortunately, some of the students succumbed to that. It was a very difficult road. But I found my affirmation. I always tell people 2 things are very important in medicine: your community, and building a community for yourself, making sure you have your network together, but then also champions who are going to be your champions as you move through. So mentors, people who are supporters, people, your village, if you want to call it, but your champions and the people who are there for you. So for me, those things are critical for students in marching through this journey.
So you're obviously a very popular internist, a very brilliant physician from all accounts of folk I know. And, but I'm sure, maybe not as much because of your new responsibilities over the last couple of years, that there were some who may have opened that little knock. I love your colleague, but every time I hear that knock, I'm like, oh, here we go. The knock, my pressure climbs, and the knock, like, uh-oh, the knock, here we go. Then I see the white coat, then we have a lot of issues after that. But I'm sure that once, at times when you have patient availability, that when they open the door, perhaps because your name is not a giveaway, it's not Lucretia, it's not, something else that may be a little more, well, you can kind of assess that this who might be behind the name. So has there been a lot of great element of surprise for some of your patients who, when you came to the door and they saw you?
So I can actually tell you we were talking about this last week. I was a colleague and I in the office. You may not know Dr. Johnson, but we were talking about when I went into medicine, a patient wrote on the magazines in the lobby that my wife's Dr. Walker is a Negro. And then Dr. Johnson said, wait a minute, I had somebody tell me that they wanted to see everybody in the office but the Black doctor.
Wow. Wow.
I've seen patients write things on the wall and hang signs up and say, and I would love to tell you that these things happened a long time ago, but they didn't. They happened within the past 15 years.
Wow.
So unfortunately, we still see patients who don't want to see us. And when I was a student, a 12-year-old child told the residents, don't have the colored lady, tell the colored lady to stop coming and seeing me in the morning. So there are many times when in fact, when the students were talking about implicit bias, I said, honey, there's still a lot of played out explicit stuff that's going to come right in your face. Mm-hmm. And so developing a mechanism for managing that, and also developing that fullness of yourself so you understand that, fortunately, I grew up in a family. My parents always told us, we lived in the South, in the semi-rural South, and they told us nobody can disrespect you because respect is about you and it's what you have for yourself. And so don't ever worry about the other people. And trust me, day by day, when things get a little hairy, I always remember that. And that helps me think about how I respond to things, and that helps me think about how I manage things. So I've always felt that I carry my respect with me. So I don't worry about whether or not that person respects me. I worry about whether or not I respect myself. I grew up in the church. That's a great source of comfort for me. It's been a great source of peace. It's been a great source of community. And so I'm still a regular church member. So that's very important to me. So I think the most important thing is developing mechanisms for managing that. Also, again, finding that beloved community, that affirming community. And I think that is really what is important and powerful.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Mouse, hearing that struggle, can you identify?
Oh yeah, I can identify. I spent 10 years working on an inpatient unit here in Hamilton, and I've had people to say things directly to my face, in regards to skin color and slurs, and even now in my outpatient practice, we have people who will still do that, even though I'm the doctor who's overseeing a great deal of their care and the owner of the practice. So it's an ongoing thing, and I think that earlier on, I was bothered and angered by it, but now I've tried to take the position that Father, help me to see them like you see them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Help me to look past the distractions of what they're saying and how they're acting. Help me to see them the way that you see them, and that allows for me to kind of work past that and try to get their treatment underway and try to help them to save themselves. Mm-hmm. So that's where I kind of place it.
Well, knowing you guys, both of you, I know that it wasn't the financial gain that drew you to medicine. It's the desire to help and to heal folks and be a part of that process. And you took the oath. The oath is do no harm, correct? Mm-hmm. That's the Hippocratic Oath. That's what you hold to. But still, you find yourselves who persons you don't want to harm, you want to help and to become whole, but they want to attempt to harm you with their words. How do you bounce back on those episodes? Did you have those that rallied around you? In a practice, when we go into the doctor's office, we know that there's some they're in the practice. Are there moments where you guys come together and you share and you all uplift each other and help press through? So when that happened, did you have somebody behind you saying, we got you, Dr. Walker? Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely, community. We, as my practice, we actually usually on Friday afternoons, we actually sit down and kind of talk about the week. And at about 4:30, everybody just kind of sits down and says all the challenges or things that they encountered, and talk about things that were difficult, talk about interactions that were difficult, some because they just really gripped you because you just couldn't really understand how this situation got to what it is, and some because the interactions were challenging. And so we talk through those and share. So that's become a part of our practice and our routine in a pretty important way to support each other with that. Because like you said, I mean, I think you definitely need people who've got your back and who are there to help you.
Have the other docs been able to really learn a lot from your experience? And I'm sure you learn a lot from theirs, but have they become even more not that they weren't, but even more sensitive to what goes on in terms of your interaction with patients?
Well, and we actually have a pretty diverse group. We have a Latino male, we have an Indian male, we have women, and so we have me, and so it's a very diverse group of 5 or 6 of us who practice together, and so we talk about these things honestly. In fact, when we were sharing last Thursday about some of the things that I have experienced, our Indian physician, who's a dark Indian person, shared some of the things that he has encountered, not just about his accent, but people who, because of his skin color, ironically, sometimes even Indians who don't want to see him because he has a darker skin color and he's associated with a different caste. So different things like that come into play. So there are lots of dynamics that enter into the room and into the space with us in medicine in terms of how we interact with each other.
Wow. Well, again, we know that it's a stressful profession. And according to the National Library of Science, 49% of women physicians reported usually having high levels of stress, and 40% felt mentally tired, and 17% took antidepressant drugs. Someone wrote a book years ago called The Wounded Healer, and it's really in essence about, as you're trying to heal, you're being wounded yourself. Just speaking to some of your colleagues, particularly female colleagues, how prevalent and challenging as it is for a female doctor in particular to manage stress, or how prevalent it is for a woman to be diagnosed with a mental illness?
So a significant amount, and you hit it on the head. So about 49 to 50% of women who are in medicine do report significant levels of burnout, more so than their male colleagues. Some of that is, again, because women really still have women have 9 to 5, but then they also have the 5 to 10 or 11. In many households. Many households haven't evolved in terms of where there is equality around the unpaid work of the household. And so many women also feel that stress. I was a single parent for a portion of the time I was working as well. And so I really understood that. And one of the things in medicine, at least a lot of times we can afford to pay for extra help, and many other women can't. Some women in medicine can't, depending on what the conditions are and how they're working, what part of the country they're at. So I think one of the things that really stresses a lot of the women colleagues that I see is that they also have the 5 to 12, particularly it's a stressful time when your children are sort of between birth until about 18 years of age. It's a very intensely stressful time that many women encounter because they're having to do a lot of work. And what I really encourage a lot of women to do is what I even encourage a lot of patients to do. Something may need to be done, but it doesn't mean that you're the one who has to do it. And for me, one of the things that was very helpful was getting someone after school to help my children with their homework and be there to take them to soccer or do different things like that. And I learned early on that what I don't need to do, there are things I clearly need to do with my children, but there are also some things that it's okay if I'm not going to do. And so I think, part of it is, and one of my favorite things I tell women, and I do it this way, is release perfection. Release them. Perfection. Your house does not just have to be beautiful. It's okay if there's occasionally a leak in something, but you got to release that perfection. And you got to say, I don't have to be perfect all the time. I don't have to be amazing. It's okay if my children eat peanut butter jelly sandwiches tonight and watch bad TV, not terrible TV, but it's okay if they watch something that's at least age appropriate, but it's the best thing. So I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. Society puts a lot of pressure on women too. And then we put it on ourselves. themselves. So I think one of the most important lessons is things may need to be done, but you don't have to do it. Ensure you have very, very important conversations with partners and your supporters so that they know that you need help to do this, because it is a field where there's a lot connected.
Yeah, and it's a struggle and a challenge for many working women who go to work and come home and have to take that second shift, the night shift, after they worked all during the day. But I do find it interesting that, as you said, that more female doctors, percentage-wise, are likely to suffer burnout than males. But one of the things that studies reveal is that one of the reasons is because a lot of female doctors spend a lot more time
Yeah, that's true.
with their patients. And studies have shown that they have more conversation and they talk longer and they're more inquisitive, and that's why, and the visits seem to go farther. And so studies say, well, that may account for one reason for burnout, because the women are really connecting with their patients.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of truth to that. And also the consequence of that, though, is when women are doing the connecting, they're seeing fewer patients, or they tend to be concentrated in fields that are more about talking and connecting. And consequently, women actually make less. And there's a lot to look at for the same unit of work that women may make less. And then in terms of how long they need to work, because women physicians also are impacted in terms of their savings that are available for retirement. So you're right. There's so many things that come into play that impact women uniquely as in terms of physicians. You've done your homework. I appreciate
it. But that's an interesting question, because you just brought up something that really given a lot of thought: the inequity in terms of pay inequity.
Mm-hmm.
So you shine some light on that, because you get billed by the doctor, the insurance take, this copay. You're just thinking that it's everybody,
Right. And there are many, many reasons why there's pay inequity. Women are more likely, and African American women in particular, are more likely to accept and care for patients who can't pay as much, or who have payers as much. So that's one thing. And you brought up the fact that some of what we do is based on the number of people you see. And so if women spend more time with patients, they consequently see fewer patients. And then there's just some inequity built into how systems look at women in the system and value them. So that is an ongoing issue. There's lots that's been documented and written about that in terms of the inequity. And some of it's the specialty. Women tend to concentrate in what we call the cognitive specialties, as opposed to the procedural-based specialties like cardiology. And women tend to be internists, psychiatrists, and pediatricians, and where we spend time talking with people and really working with them and counseling them, as opposed to actually doing things to them. So there are differences there. So there are a lot of reasons why there's maybe some equity that might be quote unquote justifiable, but the bottom line is medicine values doing things to people versus talking with them and counseling them and helping them put together plans for their lives. So a lot of that's changing. Some of that is going to change dramatically in the next probably 5 to 10 years in terms of payers and as well as the government looking at that. But it still remains a critical issue.
Wow. Joining us now is Dr. Camille Graham.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi.
She is
Hi, Quentin.
Hello there.
a very renowned pediatrician in the city of Cincinnati. Saw both of my children, and she's a 1977 valedictorian of the School of Medicine. She's also had her own mid-city pediatrics and former president of Cincinnati Medical Association. So she is the lady. So, Dr. Graham, we've been talking, and I know that you've been seeing patients tonight, and I hope that you've heard the last dialogue in which we're having with Dr. Walker. And
just a little bit of it.
Can you share about the challenges that you faced as an African American female pediatrician in terms of with your patients and your colleague? And has it been easy? Has it been rough?
No, it's not easy. I think, we face the same challenges that every other African American faces in terms of inequities of pay, inequities of patients, inequities of patient load, inequities of respect from our majority colleagues and institutions. So I think, I think Black women in particular face kind of face a double whammy in terms of that. Um, but yeah, I think it's been hard. It's not easy. I think, I always tell people, I feel like medicine is a calling, just like your job, Pastor Phillips. It's not a job; it's a calling, because no one would do this for a job.
No,
Right?
no,
For
absolutely.
a job.
Here, here.
Yeah, you
Right.
you have to have the passion for wanting to help people that sustains you, because there are times, times are bad. I remember 2008 with the first um, recession, and I knew the recession was coming before they actually announced it, because so many families were coming in and saying, my husband's been laid off, or I've been laid off, or I have to relocate to North Carolina because my job is transferring me. So we started seeing these little signals. And then the next thing that came across, of course, is people were laid off and they had no health insurance. And this was 2008. So the Affordable Care Act had not been passed yet. It was like a gleam in someone's eye, but it had not been passed. So I remember at that time, at that point, we had kind of limited our patient panel of Medicaid patients, but I saw so many people coming in who were in really, really bad straits in terms of healthcare, that I just told my practice manager, we're just going to open it up to everyone, because I couldn't see people who have been with me for years just saying, oh no, I'm sorry, you're going to find another doctor because now you have Medicaid. Fortunately, in the state of Ohio, kids qualify for Medicaid if the parents make 200% of the poverty level, which is pretty generous. A lot of states are not that generous. The flip side, though, is what they reimburse the doctor isn't that great either. But at least the kids can get care and can get vaccines and access. But I could go on and on.
Well, what you said was something that Dr. Walker just pointed to, that just the care you give, and sometimes it's the care over so much the financing and the equity. So how important, I noticed you with Mercy Health Partners, how important was it for you when you began Mid-City Pediatrics? Why was that so important for you to do?
Well, I don't know. I always wanted my own practice. My grandfather was a family practice doc in New Orleans, and he had his own, he practiced outside his house. I mean, inside his house. I shouldn't say outside his house. It was inside his house. And he knew the pharmacist down the street. He knew the neighborhood. He did house calls. He did hospital calls. And so that was my model of healthcare, which interestingly, we're going back to. We're putting care back into the community like that, where you know your neighbors, you know what's going on with them. So he didn't have to guess what was going on with Mrs. Jones down the street, because he either heard it from the neighbors or from the pharmacist or from just making a house call. And I think we're trying to duplicate that now with community health workers and putting more social workers in the field and strengthening our public health system. But to me, that was just a great model of healthcare, and I just love that true primary care model where you're actually in the community. So when I started my practice, I'm not from Cincinnati, so I didn't know a lot of people in terms of forming a base of patients or families, but I really wanted to get to know them for years and years and to form a relationship. And I think it's really the relationship that really emphasize, I think that's what primary care is about. It's really about the relationship, as much as the care. But people are not going to buy into what you say if you don't have a relationship with them. And I think we've seen that with COVID and, the acceptance of the COVID vaccine. I don't think that a 10-second ad by a movie star is going to convince people to get the vaccine, right? It really is going to take kind of a kitchen table kind of conversation. What are your fears? What are your concerns? What do you need to know? What can I tell you?
Well, I think a lot of it deals with the perceived credibility level,
right?
And I'm wondering that because you've been practicing how long, Dr. Graham?
41 years in June.
Wow. So in wow. So in 41 years, do you still at times, because of you being an African American female, do you still at times feel as though your credibility comes into question with some of your colleagues?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I'm sure Nita's experienced that. I've also experienced, I could be in a meeting and I'll say something and it will be poo-pooed, and then a white male will say it in the same meeting and it will be accepted.
Wow.
So I kind
Wow.
of learned that little politics is like I tell a white male about it first. So that person validates what I have to say. I mean, these are the little games you have to play
Hmm.
in order to be accepted.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then there's some things that maybe would be too toxic for me to say or won't be accepted.
Hmm.
But a white person can say it and it's accepted. So you
Hmm.
learn to play these little, you maneuver around the system that way.
Well, for a young aspiring for young aspiring pediatrician,
Uh-huh.
uh, and they're saying, well, and then maybe I'm black female, I've got all these challenges. Do I really want to deal with that? Tell me why would I want to deal with that, Dr. Graham?
So I think first of all you have to believe in kids. Okay, so kids are probably 5% of our budget, but they're 100% of our future.
Mm.
And we see that in healthcare. I work for Mercy, and I can tell you that 99.9% of the conversations are about people who are 50 years old or older. And I always have to wave that flag with the P on it. Here's pediatrics. Hello, we're doing some stuff to prevent that heart disease when they're 50, to prevent that stroke, to prevent that breast cancer. So it's very hard to convince people that to put the resources and the energy into producing healthy kids. And that's always a constant thing. So I think someone going into pediatrics now, even if they don't decide to do office work, there's a lot of work to be done on the policy level, on the government level. They can influence education, they can influence the criminal justice system. So they don't have to necessarily be sitting behind or in an office 24/7. I think a lot of the pediatricians who have been in practice more than 5 or 6 years are actually jumping out into those spaces because we realize that in order to change the healthcare for kids, we have to be concerned about all these other facets. It just won't work to immunize kids or to teach them to read. I always tell the reach out and read people, there are a lot of smart people in jail. They can read. And I don't think that we need to train people to read if the only job they can get in Cincinnati is the manager of a McDonald's.
Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
that's not what I'm hoping for my patients. I hope they can have the same opportunities or more opportunities than what they have now.
Wow.
So I think we have to strive for equity. And the only way we could do that really is to really get out there. And I think that's the benefit of a well-rounded education. So when young people are going to college, they really need to take those sociology courses and political science courses and
Well,
travel overseas and get
I tell you what,
well rounded.
if they have been asleep prior to the last presidency, they ought to be
Yeah.
woke now.
I hope so.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah.
Dr. Moss, Dr. Walker's talked about the importance of community, and certainly that's been implied with the comments by Dr. Graham. How often do Black male physicians rally around Black females? I mean, do Black male doctors say, "That's my sis," or how unified or together are they, Dr. Moss?
In the conversations that I've had, it has been unifying. With the CMA and the work they do and the meetings and the initiatives, it seems like everyone's rallying around each other. And, we trade notes at times as far as, what's going on, what people are experiencing. But that's been the atmosphere and the climate here in Cincinnati. Other places, it may be different. I can speak to, when I was in medical school, my situation was much like Dr. Walker in Virginia, and very few minority students in the class. But that was our squad. That was our team. Trying to find ways not only that I can make it through and I can make it to the board exam and be able to graduate, but how can we all do this? And I think that one of the things that was strengthening for my experience with that was that most of the folks in my class came from HBCUs. So there was an underlying bond that was there, and we continued that when we got to this professional school level to be able to make sure that everyone, made it through.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, the challenge goes on, and I thank you, Dr. Graham, and all of you docs, for just your awareness of the community and being able to speak truth in a profession that folks don't look to be vocal about what's going on in society. I mean, it's kind of like, just stick to the numbers, stick to the diagnoses, don't talk about anything in the community, you're outside your lane. And you're right, surprisingly, Dr. Graham, that a lot of people there are a lot of Christians in jail. I know, because I've led service in the Justice Center, and I've been amazed that there, you're not too progressive with the music. You're singing more old school songs. And if I start singing I Will Trust in the Lord, I'm amazed, how many people know I would trust in the Lord. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, we got some believers in jail. So I want to thank you guys really for your time tonight. You've been very helpful. It's been very insightful. And there's no doubt in my mind that people that will watch this segment during the week will be able to, they'll be just encouraged too. And so as we prepare to leave, final words that you might have, Dr. Walker.
A couple of final words, and one is, I think it's really important to think about what you need as a person, as an individual, and make sure that you surround yourself with people who affirm you, who love you and support you, and always ask, always ask. I wanted to mention one quick thing in terms of Black disease, and that is Dr. Susan Moore. Everybody probably remembers the Dr. Susan Moore and what happened to her over at the IU hospital with COVID, and how she had to beg to get care, and people weren't listening, and nobody cared, and she died. And the sad thing about that, so even more sad about that than in her situation, is there was a young Black woman physician who was a resident there who died about 6 weeks before Dr. Moore in childbirth. So we do live in a time that can be very challenging, and people don't always listen to us, but ask, get support. Make sure you look for the resources you need, and if you don't get it here, keep going someplace else, but don't stop until you get what you need.
Dr. Graham, as you prepare to give your final comments, I will just say, because we know that mental health is so taboo in the African American community, as you prepare your final thoughts, what do you say to parents whose children have been diagnosed with a mental illness? How do you encourage them? And how would you encourage us to be champions for our own health, starting early?
So that's a very good question. I'm encouraged, actually, having being in practice 41 years, to see the stigma of mental illness leave the Black community. 41 years ago, if I said you need to see a psychologist or you need to see a psychiatrist, people put all kinds of barriers up, refused to accept that. I think now there's a lot more awareness. I think the kids are very aware. I had a conversation at Mercy where a lot of the family practice docs are reluctant to screen teens for depression because they don't know what they would do if it was positive. And to me, it was like, oh my God, we're going back. But yeah, I think, but the teens, and they were like, well, if you give it to a 12-year-old, are they, do they feel abnormal? Say no, because now they feel that you are concerned about their mental health. And so if they have a problem, they're more likely to come to you with a problem. Mental illness is in our community just like it is in all communities. I think the early recognition of it, and going further upstream, teaching more positive parenting techniques and recognizing personality disorders early and, getting kids into the appropriate services early in life will help stem a lot of these other problems that happen later in life. And then, even for adults, as Quentin knows, I think of the guy who drove his car into the barricade, and my God, he was like flashing,
Yeah.
I need help, I need help. And his family knew he needed help, but like no one took him for help. And I just think that's such a tragedy. Like maybe we need like the 5 warning signs of mental illness, like we have the 5 warning signs of stroke,
Yeah.
to get that out to people.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I know
Yeah.
Dr. Moss and I, there is a future show which we're going to deal with pastors and mental illness, because a part of the treatment plan, yes, should be prayer, but it might be a pill too.
Mhm.
And it might be therapy, and that's okay.
Right.
And just to train some of my colleagues to understand, to be able to, they may not be able to have mastered the use of a DSM-5. I think that's what we're using now, Dr. Moss. But they may be able just to say, hey, you know what, this is going a little bit farther than me laying hands and putting oil. There's something else going on
Yeah.
here.
Right.
And I think that should be something, an awareness that should, I think that 5 signs were great. So Dr. Moss, I know that you just as a Black male, in particular as a physician, and probably beaming inside about tonight's discussion. Will leave us with some final thoughts about these women and what they do as they serve as healers.
Well, again, amazing. I've spoken about their great careers and their great contributions. And tonight we talked some about some of the challenges, of being, African American physician, also being, a woman of color, practicing medicine. Despite those challenges, I would say, and they may also say that if I had to do it over, there's nothing else I would do. Because I love it that much.
Yeah.
And I hope that, family members, parents can pass on this to their kids, that being a physician is a very cool thing. It's a way that you can help people in so many different ways, so many ways you can be a doctor. Sometimes it's at the bedside, sometimes at the clinic, but sometimes it's advocacy, directing policy. So many different things that people can do in medicine. So I just hope that our kids of color see that, so they will still, pursue this field.
Absolutely. Thank you. To our viewers tonight, we want to thank you on this Championship Monday, those basketball fans, for sharing some of the pre-game time with us to join us in a very needed discussion. I want to thank my guests, Dr. Camille Graham and Dr. Nita Walker, for your time tonight, and always Dr. Moss, our resident expert tonight. And to our viewers, we want to say to you, as we always say to you at the conclusion of every Monday show, we desire you to feel better, become better, and live better. Good night, everyone.
Okay, good night, and thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.